Well, I advise people who are creating Holocaust museums, and I become what is a self-created position, which is called the conceptual developer. So I develop the concept of what the museum should be, the story that should be told. I help them get the artifacts, I write the history for them, and we develop all of the storytelling techniques, and we look in how to create the museum. I had the rare privilege, now 20 years ago, to create the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. It was a major undertaking, a government undertaking of the United States. Its cost was $190 million then, and we also developed what has become one of the most successful museums in the world. And consequently, I've reached the stage of my career where people seek my advice and then they do something else with it. They actually listen to it.
What do you think is the most important thing it has to have a Jewish museum, an Holocaust museum, not just to be seen by Jews?
The most important word to understand about a museum is the word audiences. Not audience, but audiences. A good museum speaks to many different people. It is designed to be able to speak to the person who knows a lot about the subject, the person who knows nothing about the subject, the person who is interested in the subject, and the person who is not interested in the subject until they walk into the museum. But once they come to the museum, it's an educational and an emotional, an informative and a moving experience. And consequently, they come out of the museum a little bit of a different person with a lot more knowledge and a lot more feeling and a lot more sense of it. The most important thing in creating a museum is to make sure that it has integrity and that it doesn't manipulate you, but it informs you, and informs you on multiple levels. Not only on an educational level, but also on an emotional level, that it moves you, it touches you, it shapes your experience. And the second most important thing about a museum is that it tells a story. And I always tell that there's a difference between a motion picture and a museum. In a motion picture, which is one of the great storytelling techniques of the modern world, in a motion picture you have a captive audience in moving imagery. You see the image on the screen, and your choice as an audience is either to watch the image or to leave. In a museum, you ironically have a captive imagery and a moving audience, because the audience has to move through the museum in such a way as to see it, and the audience is mobile, and somebody can take an interest in one display but not an interest in another display. And consequently, we try to create a narrative in which every aspect of the story is clear, and every aspect of the story moves you to want to know more.
What is the story that a Holocaust museum has to tell, and how people have to go out about the museum?
The story of the Holocaust, a Holocaust museum has to tell us the story of the destruction of the Jewish people. And the near total destruction has to tell the story of the world before, because before they were victims, they were people. It has to tell the story of the rise of Adolf Hitler, how a democracy can turn into a totalitarian government. It has to tell the story of Nazi racism, which ultimately targeted the Jews, but not only the Jews, multiple people. It must tell the story of the collapse of German Jewry and the assault against German Jewry, beginning in 1933 with the attacks, continuing in 1935 with the definition of Jews, the attempt to get rid of the Jews by causing them to immigrate. Then it must tell the story of the war, because without the war the Holocaust would not have been possible, and then follow the story of the Holocaust from ghettoization in Poland to mass murder by Einsatzgruppen in the areas of the conquered Soviet Union, to the decision to kill all the Jews and how it was coordinated, the developing of the gassing installations, the end of the ghetto, and then the death camps. And in a good museum, you also follow the story through not only about the death, but also about the rebirth. because we're living in a time in which the implications of that rebirth are serious. The Jewish people decided in the aftermath of the Holocaust not to yield to death, but to rebuild Jewish life. What do we want a visitor to come out? And that's rebuild Jewish life in Israel, in the United States, in lands of freedom. Survivors came here, they contributed to Mexico, but they contributed to this country as Jews, which means that one of the other miracles of Jews surviving is they didn't decide to go out of business and quit being Jewish, but they doubled down on the bed of Jewish history. The last part of your question is, what do we want people to come out with? The most important thing we want people to come out with is the idea that in the face of massive evil, they have to act to save the victim, to protest the malaise. Ultimately, they must be prepared to do battle against that massive evil, because Hitler would not have been defeated without World War II. And they cannot remain indifferent. They should not be a perpetrator. They should not be a victim, but they also shouldn't be a bystander.